Hi everyone, and welcome back to the George Collection. I'm Rachel with Right Side Blonde. Today I'm going to bring you the fourth George. It's from April and May of 1996. Sort of ironically, this is the Virtue issue, and they chose to have Howard Stern on the cover, so I just thought that was kind of interesting. To begin this week's episode, I wanted to highlight John Kennedy's editor's letter. Have not read this one to you yet, so here we go. What do virtue and politics have to do with each other? To paraphrase comedian Will Durst in his subversive riff on the mating rituals of politicians, most Americans would tell you that politics is to virtue what an alligator is to a nest of baby ducks. But it hasn't always been that way. Virtue, or what John Adams calls the positive passion for the public good, was at the center of the debate over how to create the new American Republic. The Founding Fathers believed that the evils of the old world, entrenched privilege, a bloated aristocracy, political corruption, all flowed from the abuses of an overarching monarchy. The trick was to mold a society that diminished the government's absolute power, yet promoted the development of a virtuous citizenry. Public virtue cannot exist in a nation without private, John Adams wrote a few months before the Declaration of Independence, and public virtue is the only foundation of republics. Adams and friends were thus engraved in a delicate social experiment, balancing private virtue, frugality, temperance, and self-control, with public virtue, unselfish devotion to the common good. But by the 1820s, the remaining feeble fathers were disillusioned with the country they had founded. Instead of a republic of virtuous citizens, America was a capitalist economy driven by me-firsters. All dead, Jefferson lamented shortly before his death, and ourselves left alone amidst a new generation whom we know not, and who knows not us. Despite Jefferson's despair, the idea of public virtue remains a powerful element in American politics. Historically, conservatives have generally believed that character is homegrown, that government can't make people good, while liberals have appealed to the common good to justify domestic programs. In the past 2 years, we've seen the rise of a virtue industry, as dozens of books on the subject have appeared, by authors from Dan Quayle to Mother Teresa, from Robert Bork to Hillary Clinton, all bemoaning the decline of virtue. Not to be outdone, politicians are picking up the goodness gauntlet, but there's a twist. Some conservatives now endorse using government to affect their notions of public virtue, while shell-shocked liberals are more likely to stress virtue of the private kind. This month, with the beginning of spring, when the virtue of many is lost for good, George explores other facets of the decency debate with that pillar of virtue, Howard Stern, a man so pious he calls Mother Teresa's work with the poor a publicity stunt. While Oliver North and Mario Cuomo anoint the moral among us, NOWs, Tammy Bruce, and Marion Hammer, the NRA's first female president, muse on the vices of a man's world. Scan a dispatch from a real-life battle to save souls in East Orange, New Jersey, between the rap group Naughty by Nature and the town police. Read about the virtues of a Tom Brokaw presidency, and although the news anchor says he doesn't actually want the job, there is one favorite son who actually might, Indiana's golden governor, Evan Bay. For those of you startled by Mr. Stern's self-selection as the most virtuous American, remember the old rune. When he was good, he was very, very good, and when he was bad, he was better. On the primaries page, there was a headline that stood out to me. It says, "The dead don't vote." Which is weird because I feel like lately they kind of have been. So maybe in the 90s they weren't. Maybe they took a break and then they came back in 2020 and started voting again. I don't know. What do you guys think? For this week's article, I'm highlighting Why Don't We Do It on the Road? This is about MTV and their role in shaping political opinion. Here we go. 4 years ago, MTV changed the way politics was covered. Now the network has to prove itself all over again. The frozen lawn of Dartmouth College's Alpha Delta fraternity house is covered with hay. There's a presidential campaign visiting, and the assembled crowd needs a little traction. On stage, Bob Dole has just finished his stump speech. As acolytes and journalists swirl about the candidate, the grimacing senator quickly winds his way down an aisle of well-wishers. Her cayenne hair brilliant in the winter sunshine, MTV's Tabitha Soren stands at the end of this aisle, waiting patiently for her interview subject. Dole finally reaches her, and they greet politely and climb aboard MTV's waiting bus, a fantastically decorated campaign caravan bedecked with rap lyrics butted up against inspiring words from the Founding Fathers. The crowd cheers and the MTV bus carrying the couple pulls away from the curb. The bus rambles south on Route 120 with an hour to go before Dole's next campaign stop. He seems comfortable, if not relaxed. Soren explains that she has heard tell of openly gay soldiers serving in the U.S. peacekeeping force. Does Dole support openly gay soldiers in Bosnia? A softball. No sweat. They've got a uniform on. I support the American forces, Dole replies. And then Soren lets him have it. Do you know if you have any gay staffers? She deadpans. Do you have any gay friends? I assume, he responds, blinking rapidly. I don't give any litmus tests. When the bus pulls up in front of Elks Lodge 879 in Claremont, a buoyant Bob Dole emerges. Did you connect with the MTV generation? Shouts a reporter. The senator grins, acknowledging the applause from his generation, and declares almost convincingly, I hit a home run. It's awkward. This meeting of the acerbic 72-year-old war vet and the eager 28-year-old MTV newscaster. But with the New Hampshire primary less than a month away, Dole and Soren's bus ride was a shotgun wedding of sorts. The Dole campaign needs to reach out to young voters, while MTV is looking to earn the respect of its media peers and the Republican candidates without alienating its fickle young audience in the process. Back in 1992, MTV wasn't feeling this kind of pressure. At its 8-year-old news division, political coverage was still largely an afterthought. In 1991, Tabitha Soren, a 23-year-old reporter, suggested to MTV's then news director Dave Cyrulnik that the department cover the 1992 New Hampshire primaries. Cyrulnik dispatched her with producer Allison Stewart to the Granite State, and Choose or Lose was off and running. It was never, however, like other news bureaus. For one thing, Choose or Lose didn't set out to cover politics objectively. Always the youth advocate, MTV aimed to present politics in a way that would entertain, inspire, and involve young people. Without a dedicated camera crew, or a budget for that matter, Choose or Lose wrangled guest anchors from the music world to cover both party conventions. Ted Nugent covered the Republicans and hosted panel discussions between young voters and the candidates. Such novelties, coupled with the network's frenetic soundtracks and jump-cut, shaky cam footage, produced broadcasts that came across as irreverent but informative eye candy. This freewheeling campaign coverage also played right into the hands of the telegenic Bill Clinton. And when President Bush appeared patronizing and surly in an interview with Soren at the bitter end of his campaign, the prevailing wisdom came. Hitting a home run during an MTV appearance is a political imperative. But the Republican Revolution of 1994 roiled the landscape for Choose or Lose. None of the current GOP candidates appears to be an easy fit for MTV, whose content raises the hackles of the party's cultural conservatives. What's more, the folks at MTV don't seem to know quite what to make of the GOP. Choose or Lose, for example, is planning a segment about young Republicans who don't look like young Republicans. Explains Cyrulnik, they don't all wear bow ties and blue blazers. Some of them are metalheads. He sounds strangely hopeful. Traditional network news offices share an aesthetic with Wall Street trading floors. MTV's feels more like the newsroom of an extremely well-funded college newspaper. The news team's spiritual leader is 31-year-old Dave Cyrulnik, now MTV vice president. A former CNN producer and rap concert promoter, Cyrulnik has warm eyes and a deliberate manner. To hear him tell it, America's kids are a furious and alienated mass of self-doubting pixies with hearts of gold. MTV, he contends, is their lone voice in the political wilderness. If we don't speak for them, he says, nobody will. In order to meet the challenge of MTV's second presidential campaign, Cyrulnik has beefed up the news team, hiring 2 former White House staffers and 2 additional reporters. Cyrulnik also tried unsuccessfully to draft a New York-based reporter to do some of the heavy lifting for Soren. He originated the bus trip and is reaching out to the GOP. Last July, during the taping of Newt, Raw, a roundtable discussion between 6 20-somethings and Newt Gingrich, Cyrulnik approached John Cox, Gingrich's deputy press secretary, in search of a conservative Republican to round out his crew. The 30-year-old GOP staffer recommended by Cox ultimately turned down Cyrulnik's job offer, but thinks Cyrulnik should keep looking. Republicans and conservatives are, in general, suspicious of MTV, says this staffer. Many of them think that its videos are salacious or have violent content. Soren walks a fine line between serious reporting and hipster credibility. On the one hand, snaring interviews with newsmakers like Yasser Arafat, and on the other, asking Arafat loopy questions such as what he does to relax. We are aware that there has to be a mix of hard and soft news. We shout a Madonna headline, and then maybe I can slip in some voter registration information, says Soren. On the other hand, we spent 90 minutes on the crime bill. No one else did that. Then a 17-year-old gets up and asks the boxers or briefs question, and that got the most attention from the media. In Soren's defense, MTV Vice President Judy McGrath says, our audience expects us to make mistakes. We're not going to be the smartest kids in the class. Our viewers aren't either. They like her because she's friends with Soul Asylum. Soren, who was recently included on a panel of experts on Larry King Live, seated next to Democrat ad guru Bob Squire, thinks it might actually be easier than 1992. I've done this for 4 years now, she says. I have connections with the Republicans. They know who I am. I'm not going up and saying, hi, my name's Tabitha Soren. I'm from MTV News, and we'd like to ask you a few questions about young people. Now we can just do the job. The article goes on to talk about the bus. During its maiden voyage, the bus pulls into a parking lot of a Columbus, Ohio head injury clinic. Scott Karasek, one of the team that built the bus, admires his handiwork. A small crowd gathers at the windows of the clinic. I guess I'm going to have to get cable now, Karasek barks at Anderson. Not out of the factory an hour, and the bus has already started to do its job for MTV News. But not all the onlookers get it. A registered nurse ventures out of the clinic into the hardening afternoon chill to ask Anderson what the ruckus is all about. This is the choose or lose bus, Anderson replies, beaming. It's going to travel around the country, registering voters and covering the election for MTV News. The nurse stands, arms locked across her chest, to fight the cold, nonplussed, saying nothing. The presidential election? Anderson prompts. The nurse twists, turning away from the bus to look at Anderson for the first time, a few faint streaks of gray in her chestnut hair. Why in the world is MTV covering the presidential election? Knowing that this was taking place in the mid-1990s and seeing how it's played out, it's no wonder that MTV chose to talk politics with young people so they could perhaps help educate them on who to vote for. While it's a great idea for MTV to cover presidential elections, as the article stated, young people tend to gravitate towards the more Democratic candidates. So it begs the question, did that perpetuate the issue of one-sided politics? What do you guys think? As always, I'd love to know your comments. Thank you so much for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.
Magazine, George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process. And while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.